Estamos aqui no Instituto Internacional de Ciências Sociais, qual agradecemos, fazendo entrevista para a série Perfis de Arbitragem do IDEA, um instituto de estudos de arbitragem que tem entrevistado grandes nomes de arbitragem. E hoje temos o imenso prazer de entrevistarmos talvez o autor de um dos maiores livros de arbitragem, o professor Martin Hunter, que deu a honra de conceder a entrevista. Now I switch to English. Thanking you, Professor Martin Hunter. It's a great honor to have you here. You're one of the greatest names of arbitration, author of a famous book. And it's an honor to have you here in a series of videos of profiles of arbitration that try to disseminate the knowledge of great names like you. The first question I'd like to make is to know a little better about your background, how you became involved in arbitration and how you developed your expertise, because you're an icon of international arbitration and a big symbol. I want to know, for the youngest arbitration practitioners, how you get involved and how you built your expertise.
Well, it's hard to answer the question briefly. I was, as we say in England, articled, that's trained, a trainee, at a rather substantial firm then called Freshfields. It's now called Freshfields Brookhouse Derringer, after a merger with a very, very substantial German firm. Now, in those days, we did 2 years of training in the firm, and then we went away for 6 months to law school to do our final examinations. And I went away for 6 months, the end of my 2 years, and I came back and fulfilled my ambition to be entered into the corporate department and do corporate law, financial law. And that was fine, and after a few weeks I received a call, internal call, from the senior partner, who was called Sir Charles Wishall, saying, "Oh, Martin, have you got a moment to come down to my room?" So I said, "Yes, Sir Charles, of course." One didn't say no at that stage of one's career. And I went down to his rather large room on the 4th floor. I remember it as if it was yesterday, whereas it's over 50 years ago. And he said, he introduced me to Alan Redfern, who was a brand new partner, and said, "We have got 2 major international arbitrations just come in. One for the government of Kuwait, and the other one against the government of Sudan. Mm-hmm. And Alan will be handling them, but he needs an assistant. And what we're discussing is whether you could be his assistant for the cases." And I said, "Well, sounds very interesting, Sir Charles." And he said, "Yes, Martin, it should be interesting. You're saying you will do it?" So I said, "Yes, Sir Charles, if that's what the firm wants me to do, I will. I'd be happy to." And so he said, "Good, well, we'll leave it at that today. Alan Redfern will brief you on your duties and how it's going to work, and you may go." So I got up, turned, walked towards the door, and then, just as an afterthought, I turned and said, "May I ask a question, Sir Charles?" And he said, "Yes, of course." I said, "This is a secondment, is it, from the corporate department to Alan Redfern's department, dispute resolution?" And he said, "That's exactly right." I said, "Well, may I ask how long this secondment is expected to last?" And he said, "Well, you can ask. I can't answer it. You have to. I'll refer the question to Alan Redfern." And Alan Redfern said, "Yes, Sir Charles. Well, I honestly don't know. It's the first time we've ever done any cases like this. But I think you can probably reckon on the secondment being not less than 6 months, and probably not more than 1 year. So I said, fine. And I turned and went for the door, went away. And then the next day I collected all my belongings and took them down to Alan Redfern's department. And I told that story 33 years later when I retired from the firm in 1994. So I said, you do understand, don't you, that I'm just on secondment to the litigation department, the dispute resolution department.
Wow.
So that's the answer to that question. And then I just I've done arbitrations for up to 1994.
That's a very interesting story. You said that was one of the first big arbitrations of Freshfields. That's a reference law firm.
Yeah,
it shows that a lot has changed because now the book of business of a firm like Freshfields. How do you see the development of the arbitration as a source of work for the big law firms from that time to nowadays with all the big departments?
We're talking now about my 33 years at Freshfields plus the 20 years since I retired from Freshfields. And when I went to become a barrister, I requalified after I retired from Freshfields. And the reason I did that, by the way, was because I was by then serving more often as arbitrator than counsel. And of course, as the firm grew in size, there were 12 partners when I joined the firm. Wow. I was number 17 when I became a partner in 1967. And when I retired in 1994, there were over 250 partners. And the reason I retired, was because every time I got offered a good case, I would check the conflicts database, and I would be conflicted out of nearly all the cases I was offered.
And you spoke about the beginning of relationship with Professor Redfern that wrote the famous book with you. If you could tell us a little bit about the genesis of this book, that's a reference book for arbitration, maybe the best arbitration book.
You keep touching on little anecdote questions. How on earth we're going to do this? Yes, that's another interesting story. I was doing an arbitration, domestic arbitration, as an arbitrator between an author and a publishing house. And I got on very well with we became very good friends, the other arbitrator. I'd been appointed by the publishing house, and he'd been appointed by the author, the claimant. But we got on very well, we never had any disagreement about anything. And were and remain to this day good friends. Now, simultaneously, I was called by Sweeten Maxwell, one of the major publishers, who explained to me that they were trying to compete with Butterworth's, which is, now I can't remember which is Westlaw and which is whatever, but whichever it is, and they had the book Mustill and Boyd, which is a famous book on arbitration, on English arbitration law. And they said, we want to compete with that book. How do you, what's your advice? Would you be prepared to take it on as a project? Would you, how do you think we should do it? And I said, well, I don't think there's any point in direct competition on English arbitration law with Mustill and Boyd because, they were top 2Cs at the time. Mustill shortly afterwards became a judge, still alive. He was in the House of Lords. And so I said, well, let me think about it. And I came back to them and said, well, I think there is a market for a book on arbitration, but it should be on international arbitration, not on English arbitration, because that market is really dominated by Mustell and Boyd, and I can't write a book to compete with that book. But they don't know anything about international arbitration. And I have been involved in international arbitration since I first qualified. I probably told them the story I just told you, I can't remember. And so I do know a bit about international arbitration. And not many other people do, because it was brand new. It was only, don't forget, 1964 was only 6 years after the New York Convention was signed. And it didn't take off immediately. And the New York Convention, as you know, is the foundation stone for all modern cross-border arbitral processes. So I think we really were the first in the field. Oh, I should say why I said we, because I then realized I couldn't do it on my own. And this, by the way, this conversation with Sweet and Maxwell was probably in about 1980, between 1980 and 1982, I would think. And I was, by then, doing really nothing except international arbitration. I've almost never done any domestic arbitration.